For this video, I want to go over my current Betta fish tank maintenance routine. These are my two 8 US gallon or 30 litre Betta tank cubes that I'll be using for the video. I know they both look similar due to using the same aquarium, but they actually work in two different ways. This one uses a sponge filter for its filtration, whereas this one uses live plants for natural filtration, so this does change up the maintenance slightly, but I'll be going through the process for both. First up, I'll be going over this tank, which is my Walstad method setup that uses fast growing stem plants and floating plants to naturally filter the tank water to keep it safe and stable for my Betta fish. The tank does use a nutrient rich layer of topsoil that is then capped with a fine gravel, but take extra care to avoid disturbing the capping layer in this type of setup because nutrients can leak into your water column from the soil. The first thing I like to do is check the water quality, and I do this once per week, usually on a Sunday, as that's when I'm free to do tank maintenance. I prefer a liquid test kit over test strips, as in my experience they've been far more accurate and consistent, but remember, even liquid test kits usually only detect ammonia and nitrite over 0.25 ppm. Ammonia and nitrite levels below this can still hurt your fish, so always keep an eye out for any obvious signs of a problem in your tank. As you can see, my ammonia, nitrite and nitrate levels are all reading around 0 ppm for this week's test, so water quality looks good. This is surprisingly easy to do with this particular tank setup because the fast grown stem plants at the back of the tank and the salvinia floating on the surface naturally filter out these potential toxins and keep the water safe for your Betta. If you are new to the hobby, then ammonia and nitrite should both be 0 ppm, as they can both be very toxic to your Betta fish even in small amounts. Nitrate isn't as toxic to Betta fish, so I aim for between 10 and 20 ppm, but with this many fast grown plants in the tank, it's very rare that it gets above 10 ppm anyway, so this is still considered safe. It is rare that I test the pH level of the tank these days because Betta fish have a recommended range of 6.0 up to 8.0, and my pH really doesn't change much. So moving on with the maintenance, and we get to lid cleaning, and I remove the lid of the Betta tank and give it a quick wipe down, as this one does usually have a little bit of algae and biofilm grown on it. Next up we have plant care, and this is going to be one of the main differences between the two Betta fish tanks that I'll be servicing in this video. The filtration of this particular Betta fish tank setup does rely on natural filtration via fast grown stem plants and floating plants, so they usually require trimming on a regular basis. I start with the floating plants in the tank, and I highly recommend floating plants for any type of Walstad setup, and I have a video sharing my experiences with various popular floating plants that I link in the card and description. Before I actually remove any of the salvinia, there are a few different steps that I like to take because I also have shrimp in here and they do like to hang upside down on floating plants and graze on it. I usually like to have a quick look under the salvinia to see if there's any visible shrimp there, but even then I do like to tap it before I actually remove any, just to try and scare any shrimp off the salvinia before I lift it up. As you can see, I do hold the salvinia over the tank for a couple of seconds before removing it, just so the shrimp have a chance to jump out or drop onto my hand so I know they're there if there is still any on the plant. Personally, I usually remove enough salvinia until around a quarter of the surface of the tank is covered, but I do know people who let half of the tank or even 3/4 of the surface be covered with salvinia without issue, so personal preference comes into play here. Anyway, with the excess floating plants removed from the tank, it's easier to see and work with the stem plants in this setup, and as you can see, the Rotala rotundifolia could do with the trimming. I did used to use regular scissors for this, and in all honesty they did work fine, but I did pick up some cheap aquascape and shears for around £20 or around $25 because they are smaller and much easier to move around in the tank than scissors. These shears do make light work of Rotala rotundifolia and pretty much every other plant I've ever had to trim with them, and I get through this job within minutes. Then I start to look for any potential problems with the plants in the tank. The Sterigani repens in this tank has been developing holes in its leaves, and I do think this is due to a nutrient issue because the roots of the plant haven't got through the capping layer into the topsoil yet. Moving on, we have a partial water change, and as you saw earlier, technically this tank could be ran as a 0 water change tank because the ammonia, nitrite and nitrate levels are safe. That said, one of the main disadvantages of Walstad tanks is the lack lack of mechanical filtration, as the particulate matter in here can get everywhere when you trim plants. This is due to the biofilm that grows on the plants sticking the particular matter to the plants, and then when you disturb them for trimming, all of that matter comes off into the tank's water column. This is the main reason I like to do a partial water change after trimming the plants, as it gives me a chance to get rid of a bunch of the particulate matter in here. It's probably hard to see in the video because of the speed I'm playing it at, but other than Cooley the betta fish trying to fight the siphon a couple of times, I am moving it around the tank to get any of the visible pieces of matter that I can see. This includes everything from fish waste to detritus to shrimp mold and any leftover food that is floating around. The angle of the camera does make it look like I removed more water than I did, but I would estimate that this is between 30 and 40% of the tank water removed. I just use regular tap water for my water changes, but I do like to temperature match it to the water in my tank. I know it's difficult to see, but the infrared thermometer is reading 25 degrees Celsius, and I run my 2 betta fish tanks at 26 degrees Celsius, so with the remainder of the water in the tank already being 26 degrees C, the new water at 25 degrees C shouldn't cause any issues. So next up, I like to add dechlorinator to the new tap water that will be going into the tank to try and remove any chlorine, chloramines and heavy metals from the water. If my tank is established, then I will usually use API tap water conditioner, as it's cheaper and a lot easier to find in my area than Sea Chem Prime. On the flip side of that, if my tank is less than 6 weeks old and has fish or inverts in there already, I would usually use Sea Chem Prime at this stage, as it temporarily detoxifies ammonia in the tank to render it safe. For this one, I just use API tap water conditioner, as the water parameters in this tank have been stable for months. Now this might not offer any benefit at all, but I do like to move this siphon around in the bucket to try and mix the dechlorinator in as I siphon it from the bucket into the aquarium. I also add the water diffuser attachment to the end of the siphon to reduce the water flow when filling the tank back up, because betta fish don't really like much flow in their tank. So Cooley's decided he's in a good mood now, and he only tries to fight the siphon once when I'm adding the new water to the tank. With the new water in the aquarium, I do check the water temperature one last time, and it reads 25.7 degrees Celsius, so there's been minimal change, so realistically there's no chances of the betta fish having a problem with temperature shock. Next up is glass cleaning, and I've used a bunch of different glass cleaning tools in the hobby, and my preferred one is definitely a magnetic glass cleaner, as they're so easy to use. I do have a zebra nitrite snail in this tank, so I usually only clean the front pane of glass so the algae and biofilm is on the back and sides for the snail to feed on. If you don't have shrimp in your tank, then you can try this step before your water change to try and remove the algae with the water. I switched it up and do it after the water change, because a couple of months back now I did see that the shrimp in my 29-gallon tank came over and started to eat the algae that I cleaned off the tank glass, and it did seem to like it, so I'd like to leave it in. So here's the tank after the maintenance, and a lot of that at the top is just gas working its way out of the tap water from the water change. Next up is Stitch's tank, and I'm going to work my way through this one a little faster, as I've already explained a bunch of the process earlier in the video. So just a quick recap, this tank is different from the previous one because it uses a sponge filter for its filtration. The plants in here are mostly slow grows, and the substrate is inert, so there's no chance of nutrient leak. So first things first, and I check the tank's water quality with my liquid test kit, and as you can see it does look like the ammonia is up a little bit, but I think that this might be due to one of the Anubias glabra plants in the tank melting back. Then it's time to clean the lid of the tank, because this one usually ends up with a lot of algae and biofilm on the lid, and I think it's something to do with the velocity of the water coming out of the sponge filter compared to the air stone in the other tank. Moving on to the plant care, and the salvinia in this tank does grow far slower than all of my other tanks, but I think it's because the substrate in this tank is just regular sand and it's inert with no nutrients in there. As I mentioned, the plants in here are basically Anubias, Java fern and Bucephalandra, so they're all slow grows, and it's very rare that I need to trim them. I then check for any problems with the plants in the tank, and I do notice that something's been eating the Taiwan moss in here, but I'm pretty sure it's the horned nitrite snails because I see them on it on a regular basis. With ammonia being detected with the chemical test kit, this tank definitely needs a partial water change, but I also use it as a chance to try and remove some particulate matter as well. Unlike Cooley, who lives in my other tank and constantly tries to fight the siphon, Stitch usually tries to avoid it, and he'll just swim to the other side of the tank and watch it from a distance. As I mentioned earlier, the filtration in this aquarium is based on a cheap air-powered sponge filter, and I do like to squeeze this out once a month to remove all the gunk trapped in it. Sponge filters can sometimes release a lot of the trapped gunk back into your tank's water column, so be careful when removing this, and slow and steady definitely is the best option. I remove the protective cap from the top of the sponge filter so I can get the sponge off and start squeezing it out into the water I've just removed from the aquarium. I have seen more and more people saying that the chlorine levels in tap water are too low to cause any real harm to the beneficial colonies in your filter, but I still like to use water that I've removed from the tank to save water. I just don't see a point in using tap water that's going to be wasted when I have this water ready to go. As you can see though, this water is absolutely filthy now, and it's been around a month since I last did this process, but like I mentioned, one of the Anubias glabra plants did melt all the way back, so I'm guessing that's where a lot of these particles are from. Anyway, I put the sponge filter back in the aquarium as quickly as possible so any bacteria or archaea on the sponge is not out of the water too long. Again, I temperature check the new water with my infrared thermometer, and this one's coming in around 25.8 degrees Celsius, with this one being almost perfect as the target is 26 degrees Celsius. I add some dechlorinator to the new water before I add it to the Betta tank, but due to the test kit detecting ammonia, I use Chem Prime this time to detoxify any potential ammonia in the aquarium. I fill the tank back up with the new water as Stitch glass surfs against his reflection. This behaviour isn't due to any stress from the maintenance procedures. Unfortunately, Stitch does just have an issue with recognising this as his reflection and not another fish trying to fight him. I have been working on it, but so far I've just had no luck. With the new water being in the tank, I try and check its temperature again, but the floating plants make it difficult to get a reading while I was focusing on recording the video. Once I realised, I did recheck it and it was pretty much bang on 26 degrees. So I'm happy with that. Then I move on to cleaning the tank glass in this aquarium, and this one really doesn't get too bad because there's very little stray nutrients in here compared to the Walstad method tank. This is what the tank looks like after the maintenance, and unfortunately Stitch is still glass surfing. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. 2 different ways to do tank maintenance on a Betta fish tank depending on your exact setup. Hopefully it was helpful, and hopefully you're able to use this for your own aquariums. Thanks for watching and have a good day.